Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. For today's video, I wanted to talk about INFJs and spiritual hunger. This is a universally applied theme that I've seen across every single INFJ channel that I've ever come across. It seems like all of us go on this exploration of sorts, trying to understand the depth and complexity of the universe, and then our innermost beings as well. We need to understand our core self. It often leads us down a spiritual route. We question things and ask the big why questions. I wanted to talk about my personal journey with this, and also I think what you should do as an INFJ if you have this hunger for things. I think it is incredibly important that we explore this territory and talk about it from an objective standpoint too, of just like, why are we like this? I think the more clarity you have about who you are, the easier it is to walk through this world. And it also, I think, is really important for other people to see your gifts in the world. So yeah, I'm just going to tell a little bit about my own story and then talk about some things that have relieved me on this journey of an infinite hunger when it comes to these topics. I think if you resonate with the INFJ personality, you probably have this unsettling wisdom about you, which is noticeable from an early age. I remember I didn't really have to learn things the hard way. It seemed like a lot of my classmates would be doing foolish things, and I already inherently understood the consequences of that sort of behavior. So I often felt like I just wasn't a very fun person because I had this old soul about me that already knew the inherent wisdom of things. I didn't need to really delve deep into any type of foolish behavior to understand that that was going to end up in a bad route. I think that gave me this kind of ambiguous loneliness as well, because I didn't know why I was this way. Why am I so complex? And able to kind of see into the underlayers of behavior in a way that other people can't. I think a lot of people who identify with the INFJ personality type have trauma in their childhoods, which caused them to be more sensitive and observant and just kind of take a seat back when it comes to actually being involved in certain social activities. I personally don't really have that story. I think my sensitive gift is mostly just genetic. I just inherit it from my parents. Most of the traumas that I did have were related to my sensitive trait. I think I was just unusually cognizant of my energy and other people's energy. Small facial cues and things of that nature just made me very self-aware and overly thinking every type of interaction that I had. So that was kind of more my trauma, was just my depth, my complexity, and my sensitivity, which was just inherent to me. I was just like that coming into this world. When you have that heightened sense of self-awareness, you're sort of forced to study yourself. And I found myself journaling a lot as a kid and trying to put my intricate thoughts to words, because I think oftentimes if you have these jumbled up thoughts, that's just really toxic to an INFJ. You have to sift through them and kind of untangle them and get them out on paper so that you can just understand yourself a little better. So I started journaling at a very early age, and that just became a regular habit for me. Probably the part of my own history that I don't think every INFJ will be able to resonate with. I have a pretty diverse audience right now, I think, just from the east to the west, and believers and non-believers as well, I think. In my own background, I have a religious upbringing, and I struggle using that word religious because in Christianity, which is what I was raised in, we often talked about how it's a relationship and not a religion. There's this culture about it that I just don't really like the word religious. But it was religious, and there were components of it that were very religious. So I have to look at it that way. I personally had this channel of expression to be able to explore these deep and existential questions through. And I'm kind of thankful for Christianity for that reason, because it just gave me this unified way to be able to ask questions in an environment where it was safe to do that. And I think my religious upbringing, it had its highs and lows. There were definitely parts of it that were traumatic. But for the most part, I had a very strong affinity for it. And I wanted to explore everything about it and just kind of have a deeper understanding of the scriptures and the Bible in general. I personally didn't have a lot of animosity towards the religion. I know that a lot of INFJs, I think when they're in those environments, end up being kind of they go through so much, I think, just being around people who might have a more superficial understanding of the religion. And there's a lot of trauma involved with that as well, which I completely understand. But for my own story, I didn't really have anything that was completely repelling about it right away. So I just gravitated towards it and used it primarily as my route for understanding these deeper things. So I personally started reading the Bible at a very young age. I think I was 13 or so when I started, and I think the first book that I read was Ecclesiastes, which, if you don't know the Bible very well, and I don't know who's in my audience, but that one is very philosophically dense, and it's the most existential, I think, of the books of the Bible, and it's kind of dreary as well. It just goes through life and like everything is pointless. It starts out that way. And I remember when I was 13, I had kind of this darkness of existential dread on me during those years. And I opened the Bible to a random page, and I remember reading the very first verse of Ecclesiastes, which says everything is meaningless, and it just really resonated with me. So I liked having that book to be able to explore my existential thoughts, and I felt very thankful for it. I also really liked Proverbs. It's like the book of wisdom that just has these very short and kind of just pithy kind of sayings that are universal throughout all of wisdom. This is what the wise person does, and this is what the foolish person does. And I really liked it, actually, because it just validated me in a way, because I needed to understand why it was that it was just so easy for me not to do certain foolish behaviors. And it felt really nice having this external resource say back to me why that was. Yeah, I didn't really have any personal animosities towards the Bible at all. And I read it cover to cover like 3 times, I think, in my lifetime, just very deeply exploring it. What a weird thing, I think, also for a young person to do that. Like, I didn't realize how strange that was of me to be exploring these topics, but I kind of felt it in that my other classmates were not really interested in these topics. So I think, universally speaking, no matter your background, whether it was religious or not, INFJs have a strong hunger for the truth above all things. They really want a felt understanding and experience of any type of concept that they come across. I think where I started to deviate from the more religious aspects of Christianity was that hunger. Like, I wanted the truth above all things. And it seemed like a lot of people around me were content with a superficial understanding of certain concepts. Like, for me, for instance, saying like belief leads to salvation is a very complex thing. The word belief, I think, has a lot of different meanings to it. It can mean things like an ideological structure or like a deeper subconscious conviction. Like, there's just so many backings to that word, conceptual backings to that word, that being lazy about it was problematic to me, especially because I saw how that ended up in my culture, people doing very unsavory things, saying that if you don't believe in something, then you might end up going to hell and stuff like that. So I personally felt like it was extremely important to dive into what the word belief meant, because it potentially meant your salvation or not. So that was where I started to deviate, I think, from the standard like cultural package of Christianity that I grew up in. Honestly, it's impossible for me to be concise about my journey with that, though, because I think I, as a Christian, had a lot of very dogmatic beliefs as well that I was very unconscious of, and stigmas and biases against other belief systems that I was very unaware of. And I think in my own journey, I did have a point where I made a promise and like a very strong intention to myself that I wanted the truth above all things, no matter the cost to my ego. And I think that was what ended up kind of dragging me on this route, where I explored other spiritual topics. So that's something I'm not really going to get into in this video. But I personally, in my own journey of seeking the truth, have been led down things that I would never have thought that I would go down. It seems more like, if you are on the spiritual path, sometimes things happen to you rather than you seeking them out. And I would consider myself a spiritual seeker these days, but back in the day, that was really not the case. I was seeking the truth, and these things happened to me. I think that's potentially the preferable route for an INFJ. I personally get kind of turned off by people who want something to be true, so they just like explore the topic as much as possible, but it's mostly from this confirmation bias that they're exploring it. So it's better off when you have weird things happen to you and then you're like forced to learn about it because it was a weird experience. You're curious about it for that reason. Anyway, what happened to me was I ended up having mystical encounters, which were outside of my religious dogma and couldn't really be explained through my religious dogma. That sort of forced me to explore other things. At this point, I think I've read over 100 books on spirituality and psychology. I actually counted them like a month ago, and I think I was at about 112 books that I can reasonably remember within the past 4 to 5 years or so, which cover a broad range of spiritual topics and psychology and all of these things. I've read the Bible and the Quran. I think a lot of people end up kind of evangelizing in the comments what I should read and like certain texts and things. And I've read a lot just to satiate my desire for understanding these things. I think that if you are an INFJ, you should satiate it. Like if you have this deep hunger, I think the world really needs you to explore these topics. We need people who are not lazy about using words like belief and like who fully understand and like embody what it means to believe. I personally am very curious about my audience. I want to know people's backgrounds and like who's out there watching me, because I feel like there's a lot of things that I want to explore topically as well. I would take any questions, and anybody who has these interests, I want to know the things that keep you up at night when it comes to existentialism. So yeah, feel free to drop in the comments who you are and what your experience is as an INFJ when it comes to spiritual hunger. And if you have questions, I would be happy to answer them. I'm going to try to keep this dense topic short, but truthfully, I am also a little bit sleep deprived right now because I stayed up at night thinking about this. Like, how am I going to talk about spiritual hunger? It's just such a huge topic that it was impossible for me to be concise about it and distill it in its essence. So anyway, thank you all for listening. Feel free to drop your comments, and I will see you all next time.